All right, God's glorious new Jerusalem. God has been planning. God is looking forward to. God is longing for the day when he can begin his reconstruction program for Jerusalem. God in heaven is planning the most fabulous planet Earth capital city. Right? When they planned Washington, D.C., they spent a lot of money, they went to a lot of trouble, they designed it as best they could, and it's now the power center of the world, of the free world. Jesus had Isaiah write about his plans in Isaiah 65:18. It says, "But be glad and rejoice forever," right, "in what I create," God speaking, "for behold, I create Jerusalem as a rejoicing," hasn't happened yet, obviously, right, "and her people a joy." So you're going to have really happy people in a really beautiful city of Jerusalem. We're not there yet, but God is saying, I will do that. It's going to happen. Right? Verse 19, "I will rejoice in Jerusalem and joy in my people, and the voice of weeping shall no longer be heard in her, and the voice of crying," so the way it has been is going to stop. And the way it will be that God is planning and designing, that's going to happen. That's going to be the way it is in the future. When is this all going to happen? Answer is when Jesus comes back to rule all nations on planet Earth, right? And so Jerusalem it's been his pride and joy. It's been from the days of King David when he said, I want to have a special place for God's holy place. And God said, okay, I'll help you find a place. And they found a place, and it's been Jerusalem ever since. But there have been wars and crying in the streets and dying in the streets, and there's going to be more of that, and it's probably happening right now. It's like there's almost never a day when there aren't missiles being fired into Jerusalem or into Israel or Palestine. So just before the Battle of Armageddon, Jesus lands his feet in Jerusalem. Right? Everybody says, oh, Battle of Armageddon, the end of the world. No. Battle of Armageddon is the end of human governments. It's the beginning of God recreating planet Earth as a beautiful, beautiful place. So Zechariah 14:4, "In that day his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, which faces Jerusalem on the east, and the Mount of Olives shall split in two from the east to the west, making a very large valley," which is fascinating, and there's a lot more history that goes with that and what he's going to do. But the first thing Jesus does when his being touches planet Earth, he starts reconstructing the mountain and the area around Jerusalem so that he can make it into this fabulous, shining world capital city. Just after the Battle of Armageddon, Jesus establishes Jerusalem as Earth's capital city and the worship center for all the world. In the news lately, there's been talk about Mecca and Medina, and how Saudi Arabia has control over the two most holy religious sites. It's like, well, in the future, when Jesus is on the planet, the only most holy religious site will be Jerusalem, right? And people will be urged to send representatives up to the Feast of Tabernacles in Jerusalem every year to learn about how the planet is going to be run for the next year, what the goals are for the next year. So in Zechariah 14:16, "It shall come to pass that everyone who is left of all the nations which came against Jerusalem," meaning when they attacked Jerusalem and the Battle of Armageddon took place, all of the other people, the soldiers went down to kill Jesus, right? But there were other people still at home, still in their home cities and home nations. All of those who are left after the Battle of Armageddon shall go up from year to year to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, Jesus. Right? Everybody knows Jesus. This is what Jesus is planning to do. And to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. I think early in my studies, before I really came into the church, I went to this several times. It's like, you mean to tell me when Jesus lands on the planet, everybody's going to have to go to the Feast of Tabernacles. So then why aren't we doing it now? Right? if it's going to be instituted in the future, and it was instituted in the past, and Jesus did it, and Paul taught festivals, and then it just made a whole lot of sense, and I started keeping Feast of Tabernacles. Verse 17, it shall be whichever of the families of the earth do not come to Jerusalem to worship their King, King Jesus, the Lord of hosts, on them will be no rain. So God is planning to punish nations. He's not going to lock them up in prison, and he's not going to take their babies out of their mother's arms. He's just going to say, oh, you don't want to send people? Well, it's going to be dry and thirsty, right? And in Egypt, they can get by somewhat off the Nile River. There's normally a lot of water in the Nile River, and they can eat the fish out of the Nile River. So, they're not all going to die of starvation. It won't become a desert, but it's going to be pretty dry. You've all had summers that have been really hot and dry summers, right? Okay, so Jesus will say, I'm going to turn off the rain over your city, over Egypt or over Australia, or whoever decides we're not going to send ambassadors over there, and the punishment will just take place day after day. Boy, it's hot and dry. Yeah. Do you think we should have gone up to the Feast of Tabernacles last year? Yeah, I'm beginning to think we should have done that. So before Jesus, the extraterrestrial king, comes to rule over planet Earth, there are 3 human leadership kings that have powerful impacts on the city of Jerusalem. All right? The king leader before Jesus is known as the Antichrist, beast power king, and he destroys the city of Jerusalem. There are some Messianic Jews, there are some Jewish Jews who read the Old Testament, ignore the New Testament, and they say, God will never allow Jerusalem to ever be destroyed again. And it's like, Jesus said, definitely will be destroyed before the coming of Christ. Luke 21:20. And when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that its desolation is near. It's going to be wiped out. Jerusalem will not be Jewish anymore. It will not be the center of the worship of Judaism and Old Testament religion. Luke 21:24, and they will fall by the edge of the sword, they'll die in battle, they'll be led away captive into all nations, into prison camps. Right? Germany did that to Israel back in World War II. And Israel has in their mind, we will never let that happen again. Well, the beast power king is tricky and sneaky. And he's a good politician. He lies a lot, right? And he comes in and he says, I'll take care of you. I'll protect Jerusalem. And he brings in peacekeeping armies around Jerusalem. And that's why Jesus said, when you see the peacekeeping armies, doesn't say peacekeeping, but if you put, throughout history, if you put armies circling a city and they're about to attack, you can't leave the city. So Jesus says, when you see the armies, leave the city. So, then what kind of armies are they? Well, they're United Nations peacekeeping armies. And so you're free to leave the city, right? But not for very long. You better do it the same day as you find out what's going on. So he says, taken away captive into all nations, and Jerusalem will be trampled by the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles is fulfilled. Okay, that doesn't tell us a lot. What is this? How long is this? Revelation 11:2 tells us how long it is. They will tread the holy city, Jerusalem, underfoot for 42 months. So they have a battle, they destroy the Israeli government, they destroy the Israeli army. Those who don't die in the battle are taken away into prison camps in different nations around the world. And then the Gentiles rule Jerusalem for 3.5 years of the tribulation, right? This Antichrist king is the third king of 3 final human kings. And a lot of people don't see this in prophecy. They don't know this in prophecy. Some people even say, it's really strange that the nation of the United States of America is never mentioned in prophecy. It's like, it's right there, but they've lost track of it because they don't realize that, that there were 12 tribes of Israel, and everybody focuses on one tribe, Judah. And they've lost total sight of where the other 11 tribes went around the earth, right? So they don't know what to look for, therefore they can't find the United States in prophecy, right? This Antichrist king is the third king of these three final kings. Daniel 11:19 is where you see the three kings in a sequence order. Then he shall turn his face toward the fortress of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall and not be found. He's been a great mighty king, and now he comes to the end of being a great mighty king, and his kingship or his world leadership is given over to another one, and he's replaced by the guy in verse 20. Here comes the king, the second king in the sequence of three. And there shall arise in his place one who imposes taxes on the glorious kingdom, and within a few days he should be destroyed, not in anger or in battle. He gets replaced. But notice, he imposes taxes on Jerusalem and on Israel. If Jerusalem and Israeli people are in prison camps, how much taxes can they pay? None. They have to be a viable nation. So they are still viable when this second king comes on the scene. Then comes this third king in verse 21, who replaces the second king who died in just a few days, not in anger or in battle, but he's dead, right? Along comes this third guy. In his place shall arise a vile person to whom they will not give the honor of royalty. He's not logically the next person in succession to be the leader of the free world, but he should come in peaceably. Oh, peace, peace. And he will seize the kingdom and the leadership of the European nations by intrigue. And part of that intrigue is, he says, I'll take care of you, Israel, right? And then he sneaks up on them, he lies to them, and he attacks them and destroys them, right? Right after the abomination of desolation day. So 9 verses after verse 21 shows that this king number 3 is the abomination of desolation king. Verse 31, forces will be mustered by him, and they shall take away the daily sacrifices and place there the abomination of desolation. So this is the end time king who brings about the abomination of desolation, who destroys the city of Jerusalem, who tramples it underfoot for 3.5 years, who is the last of the three world-ruling kings, right? And he is destroyed by Jesus, the fourth king, the extraterrestrial king, the forever king. So after the Battle of Armageddon, Jesus destroys this third human king. Revelation 19:20 says, then the beast was captured, and with him the false prophet who worked signs in his presence, and by which he deceived those who received the mark of the beast and those who worshipped his image. These two were cast alive into the lake of fire burning with brimstone. So now that third king, that final human king, is dead. His empire is finished. And now the Battle of Armageddon is over, and it's time for God, under the leadership of Jesus Christ, to set up a beautiful, beautiful world, which includes Jerusalem being set up as the great worship center and the great capital city, Washington, D.C. Back in those future days, unless you're a history buff, somebody says, remember Washington, D.C.? They'll go, the what? What's a Washington, D.C.? What is that? Right? We live by it every day, but they won't know what that is. They're going to go, Jerusalem is the capital of the world. Everybody knows that, So the third human king reigns over the tribulation period and is destroyed when Jesus comes to earth to rule the planet. Before the third king begins is the king who imposes the taxes. So you come Jesus, back one king, the tribulation king, you come back one more king, he imposes taxes on the people of Israel, right? And before the taxation king is the human king leader who saves Jerusalem from World War III, right? And most people, they're not seeing this in Scripture at all, because most people, they don't see Saturday Sabbath in Scripture. You ask 2 billion Jesus-following people, does Jesus command that we keep Sabbath on Friday night, Saturday night, Sabbath? And they say, absolutely not. Jesus doesn't want you doing that anymore. It's like, and your scriptures for that are? Well, there are 8 places where it mentions the first day of the week, and that's our proof, right? And it's like, no, that's not your proof, because Jesus told Paul to go teach Gentiles how to be good Sabbath keepers. That doesn't make, so it never got changed. The human Roman Catholic Church changed it in 325 AD. So before this taxation king, the human leader saves Jerusalem out of World War III. Back in 1945, America saved England and Europe out of World War II. So it's not like, well, America doesn't do that sort of thing. Yes, it does. It does it all the time. It's been invading the Middle East. It's been invading Europe. And back in 1945, and this is when I first started driving across the United States, it slowly dawned on me that in 1939, the United States of America was not a superpower. I came to America from Australia, and I drove around, I look at the shiny cities and the big this and the big malls and everything, and Texas, how big it is, and it's like, wow, America has always been a superpower. And then it dawned on me, no, it hasn't. In 1939, America was just a bunch of farmers, out here building a nation, free nation, 4th of July, but they weren't the superpower that said, hey, Hitler, don't do that, which we now do, right? So he says, let's see, this king number 1, right, the first one, and then comes the taxation king after the first one's taken out of the way. Then comes the third king, the beast power, the tribulation king. Then comes the 4th king, Jesus, to set up the new Jerusalem. So this king number 1 enters Israel and Jerusalem and is undefeatable, right? And you have to read these verses pretty slow. And what's interesting is, it took me quite a while to see this, but in verse 16, it says, he shall stand, this is talking about king number 1, right, the one that saves Israel out of World War III. It says, he shall stand in the glorious land, i.e. Israel, Jerusalem. And then one of the Bibles that I have says, with destruction in his power, right? Okay, other translations say, he will stand in the glorious land which is destroyed by him. And I put in the handout there's only 2 Hebrew words in that section. One is, which by his hand, and that's the Hebrew word 3027 from Strong's. And then one more word, Hebrew 36:15, right? And so the translators said, I wonder what all this means, right? The first word means his hand is mighty. He is a mighty, powerful entity. The second word means that he has total completion power. So, if you are going to invade the Middle East and protect Israel in the future from its enemies, and you're going to capture and subjugate many Middle Eastern nations, are you a mighty power with completion power in your hand? And so this is king number 1, because we're in verse 16, right? By the time we get down to verse 19, it says, and now he's finished. And we get another copy of that over in verse 44 of Daniel, where it says he wins the Middle East war, he saves Israel, he destroys a military power to the north and to the east, he settles there in the Israeli area, and then he comes to his end. Doesn't tell us how he comes to his end. We all want to know how does he come to an end, but it doesn't tell us, right? And then the very next verse, which happens to be in chapter 12, verse 1, says, and then the tribulation begins with king number 3, right? So Daniel 11:41, he shall enter the glorious land, and many countries will be overthrown. How many? Based on what's happened in Afghanistan, it took us 3 weeks from 9/11 to have troops, boots on the ground in Afghanistan. 3 weeks. The American populace said, they can't attack us, they can't do this to us, and there was agreement amongst most Americans, go get them. Go send troops to the Middle East, right? Because you hit us and we're going to hit you back hard. So verse 24 of Daniel 11, he shall stretch out his hand against the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. He shall have power over the treasures of gold and silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt, and the Libyans and the Ethiopians. He takes control of their precious things, oil, treasures, gold, silver. This is not like we've had in the past. This is not nation-building invasion of the Middle East. How many troops, how much military power is going to be needed in order to accomplish this saving Israel and Jerusalem from World War III? It's going to have to be the greatest, humongous military power the world has ever seen. And where's it going to come from? It looks like it's going to come from the Oval Office if Trump stays in power, right? Okay, I've got a little table there. It says King number 1 saves Jerusalem out of World War III. Okay, King number 2 taxes Jerusalem after the King number 1 leaves the scene. King number 3 destroys Jerusalem, as Jesus said he would. And King number 4 glorifies, rebuilds, resettles Jerusalem, makes Jerusalem into the fabulous capital city of the world, the worship center of the world. So World War III will begin when many nations in the Middle East become unified militarily against Israel and Jerusalem and the United States. Iran has been working diligently with our help, right, to take control of the Middle East. Right now they're having a problem because, the guy in the Oval Office is saying, we ain't doing that no more, right? So, but the goal for Iran was to take control of the Saudi Arabians, the Egyptians, everybody. Iran wanted to control the whole Middle East. Right now, it's on pause, it's on hold. They're not making the kind of progress they wanted to be made because we're not shipping them cash anymore by aeroplane, right? So the human king, leader of the free world, will save Israel and Jerusalem out of the giant conflict by having a super mighty military power. Then comes the tax man, king number 2. Then comes the tribulation king, king number 3. And finally comes the king of the north, the 4th king, king of kings, Jesus, who sets up the fabulous Jerusalem as world capital for planet Earth for 1,000 years of the millennium.